Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Shamshina Ahmed. Please, shall we all rise and give her a round of applause as she walks in? If you know how she's been working so hard in the past days, you will clap harder, especially the sterling performance of presentation she gave yesterday for Agenda 2050 for Nigeria. Please, you can do better. You're welcome, ma'am. As she takes her position, we shall remain upstanding for the national anthem. We still remain standing for the second stanza of the national anthem. We'll recite it individually and collectively as our opening prayer. 1, 2, 3, go. O God of creation, direct our noble course, guide our leaders right, help our youth the truth to know, in love and honesty to grow, and living just and true. Great lofty heights attain to build a nation where peace and justice reign. And Nigerians and friends of Nigeria shall say, Amen. Please have your seats. The Honorable Minister, our permanent secretaries, members on the table of responsibility, members on the other side of the divide who shall be introduced in due course in the course of the program. Permit me remind us that it was on a certain Friday, the 7th of October 2023, that the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, accompanied by his trusted and able lieutenant, including the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Shamshina Ahmed, CON, presented and laid before a joint session of the National Assembly the 2023 Appropriation Bill, valued at 20.51 trillion naira. It's been 12 days since that occurred, and more actions have occurred. But Nigerians have wanted to know a breakdown of the components of this amount, because what you don't understand, you might resist. And that's the reason why we are here today, for a public presentation, a breakdown to the understanding of Nigerians, the component parts of the 2023 executive budget proposal. But before I go down to that, permit me once again to recognize in our midst the presence of the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Shamshina Ahmed, CON. Please a round of applause to her. We also have in our midst the Permanent Secretary, Finance, Mr. Aliyu Ahmed. We have the Permanent Secretary, Budget and National Planning, Mr. Neboliza Anako. We have the Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabueze. We have the Acting Accountant General of the Federation, Mr. Silva Okoliabo. We also have here in our midst the representative of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation, Dr. Folashade Yemieshan, who is here represented by Mr. Ibrahim Yusuf, FCA, Permanent Secretary, Common Services Office in the Office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation. We also have here in our midst Mr. Simon Kato, FCTI, FCNA, the Honorary Treasurer, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, representing the President of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. We also have here in our midst a Director, Revenue in the Federal Inland Revenue Service, Francis Okorafo. We also have here in our midst Dr. Chioma Ejikeme, the Executive Secretary, Pension Transitional Arrangements Directorate. We also have here the Senior Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly Matters, House of Representatives, Honorable Nasiru Babale Ila. We also have here in our midst the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Education, Mr. Andrew Adejo. I might need to add that he's representing the Minister of Education, Mr. Andrew Adejo. Again, a round of applause for him. There's still so much to be done, but we need there are more important recognitions to be done, and it will happen in the course of the event. But for now, permits me to respectfully recognize and invite for a welcome remark the Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabueze. Please, a round of applause for him.
Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Permanent Secretaries, Heads of agencies, let me recognize and welcome the Executive Chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, Victor Murako, who is here with us. And let me then stand on the already established protocols by our MCO, but let me also, personally recognize and welcome the country representative of the International Monetary Fund in Nigeria, Mr. Ari Eisen, who is here with us this morning. It is my privilege and honor once again to welcome you all, those physically present as well as those joining us online, to this event. In his speech at the presentation of the 2023 budget proposal to the National Assembly, Mr. President stated that the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning will be providing further details thereof. And that is essentially why we are gathered here today. Expectedly, you have had a chance of interrogating the 2023 budget proposal since Mr. President laid it before the National Assembly. I note that the 2023 budget proposal has generated already significant public interest as reflected in the several public discussions and articles on the 2023 budget proposals. We therefore look forward to a robust engagement on the subject today. We are normally very reticent about the improvements we have brought to bear on the FGN budget process over the past 6 years, but I'll break with that tradition today, albeit briefly. And the said improvements include the following. One, significantly enhanced use of technology in the budget process, including service-wide implementation of the GIFMIS budget preparation system. This has minimized errors in the budget and facilitated timely passage of the budget, thus enabling a sustained return to a predictable January to December fiscal year. In this regard, of course, we have enjoyed strong cooperation from the National Assembly. Two, in a bid to enhance budget comprehensiveness and transparency, the FGN's budget now includes all projects funded by bilateral/multilateral loans, donor-funded programs/projects, as well as the revenues and expenditures of 63 major government-owned enterprises/regulatory agencies. Three, enhanced and timely availability of budget-related information to the public through the Budget Office and Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning websites, as well as responsiveness to freedom of information requests. This has facilitated greater public participation in the budget process. Number four, strategic refocusing of the budget to the revenue side thereof, rather than a mere statement of expenditure proposals. This led to a redesign of the appropriation bill to include both revenue and expenditure estimates, and has contributed to the substantial growth in non-oil revenue performance recorded. A new performance management framework for government-owned enterprises was introduced to support this effort. Number five, 3 years ago, we introduced the enactment of annual finance acts to keep our fiscal policies like laws up to date and support the implementation of the annual budgets. This was the first time since the return to democratic governance in 1999. These improvements have been validated by the significant improvements in FGN's public expenditure and fiscal accountability review ratings by the World Bank. Nigeria's 2021 Open Budget Index scores on fiscal transparency and accountability also reflected significant improvements, with Nigeria ranked among the top 2 reformers. We nevertheless keep striving for continuous improvements in the FGN budget process. For instance, we will shortly be launching the National Budget Portal that will be a one-stop access point for information about the budgets of the federal, state, and local governments. And this will enable more accurate reports about Nigeria's national expenditure on key sectors like health and education. In the interest of time, let me pause at this point and once again say welcome to the ministerial presentation of the 2023 Executive Budget Proposal. Thank you for your attention.
He deserves a better round of applause. Thank you. Before we head to the next item on the list, permit me recognize in our midst Mr. Ibrahim Jibril Zarenta, our Zarewa, please. Mr. Ibrahim Jibril Zarewa, a critical stakeholder, a repository of wisdom, and one who's come here to add value. Please, a round of applause for him. We also have here the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, here represented by Professor Sani M. Adam, SAN, a national commissioner, and Dr. Baba Bila, a national commissioner. Please, a round of applause for him. Please, once again, permit me specially recognize in our midst the presence of Ari Eisen, the IMF resident representative to Nigeria. Mr. Ari Eisen, could you just wave? Thank you so very much. Remember, the reason why we are here is the public presentation of the 2023 Executive Budget Proposal, bringing it closer home to the common man on the streets. At this point in time, permit me welcome to the podium our Honorable Minister for the presentation of the 2023 Executive Budget Proposal, Mrs. Zainab Shamshina Ahmed, CON.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome everyone to this meeting and especially recognize the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, and the Permanent Secretary, Budget and National Planning, but also the Permanent Secretaries from Education that are here, heads of agencies, and representatives of some of my colleagues, ministers that are here, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Ari, special welcome. I see also our brothers and sisters from the media, directors, heads of agencies, staff of the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you all recall that His Excellency the President presented the 2023 budget proposal to the joint session of the National Assembly on the 7th of October. And this underscores the administration's commitment to sustain the return to a predictable January to December fiscal year. And I must say that Mr. President also presented the 2022 budget on the 7th of October last year. So I don't know whether the 7th of October is also becoming a tradition, but let's wait and see what happens next. The principal thrust of the 2023 appropriation proposal, which we christened the budget of fiscal consolidation and transition, is to maintain fiscal viability and ensure smooth transition for the incoming administration. This budget proposal has been prepared against the backdrop of continuous global and domestic challenges caused by the multiple crises of the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, more recently the war in Ukraine, but also the continuous fiscal tightening that is being undertaken by the Fed, the Central Bank of the US, which is resulting in hyperinflation across the world. There's also the fact that the global economy itself is weakening. So this is where we are right now, and it's not where we are is a global, a place of global fragility, and Nigeria is part of the global economy. So many economies around the world are currently contending with a lot of fiscal instability, slow growth, food crisis, as well as high interest rates. Like many other countries, our economy faces headwinds from low revenues, high inflation, exchange rate depreciation, as well as insecurity in our case. Factors that are impacting the medium-term outlook include the war between Russia and Ukraine, which has assumed a very new and worrisome dimension, with severe implications on food and energy prices, which have heightened the cost of petroleum subsidy for Nigeria. The resurgence of COVID-19 in some major economies of the world, notably China, has also led to slowdown in economic activities in those countries. Elevated inflation in most economies, prompting monetary tightening in these economies, with the inherent negative impact on capital inflows to emerging markets and developing economies. There's also the challenging domestic macro and business environment and the negative impact of insecurity on the domestic economy. The Nigerian economy, despite all of these challenges, has sustained its recovery from recession, reporting a seventh consecutive quarter of a positive growth of 3.54% in real terms in the second quarter of this year. Most sectors recorded positive growth. The broad-based growth reflects the effective implementation of our economic sustainability measures. The IMF expects the Nigerian economy to grow by 3.2% in 2022 and 3% in 2023. But as I reported earlier on, just this last week when we came back from the IMF World Bank annual meetings, the global growth has been adjusted down again to 2.73%. There is significant improvements in the Nigerian economy, and we are right to claim that the Nigerian economy is diversified across several sectors, with several sectors of the economy reporting macro economic resilience, but with the oil and gas sector contributing only 6.33% of the GDP as at the second quarter of 2022. The greatest contribution to our GDP is still from the agricultural sector at 23%. This is followed by the information and communication sector at 18%. Trade follows at 17%, manufacturing at 9%, and then the oil and gas sector. We have seen between the first quarter 2021 and the 2022 and the second quarter 2022, significant increase in transportation and storage. So the transport sector has grown by 168%. This growth is closely followed by the growth in the electricity, gas, and steam sector by 54%, and then the water and supply sector by 46%. There are several sectors that are reporting positive growth, but the oil and gas and the mining sector are continuing to report negative growth at minus 22.02%. The IMF forecasts global growth to slow down from 6.0% in 2021 to 3.2% in 2022. But the IMF also forecasts that 2023 growth will slow down to 2.7%, the weakest growth profile since 2001, except for the global financial crisis and the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. This global economic slowdown is projected to affect all the advanced economies. Growth in the United States has been revised to just 1.6% in 2022 against 2.3% that was projected earlier. And also, it's expected to further taper down to 1% in 2023 in the possibility, and there is also a strong possibility of a recession even in the US. In the Euro area, growth is projected to be 3.1% in 2022, better than what was projected for July, with just 0.5%. But the zone could lapse into recession as well in 2023. China, the world's second largest economy, is expected to experience its worst year in more than 40 years in the year 2022, excluding what they experienced during the COVID, but with the expectation of growth of just 3.2% before recovering slightly to 4.4% in 2023. Global inflation is forecast to rise at 4.7% from 4.7% in 2021 to 8.8% in 2022, but it will begin to taper down to 6.5% in 2023. Why we report these things they're important because they have a direct impact also on the Nigerian economy. We live in a global world. Next, I want to report on the performance of the current year budget, the 2022 budget. You recall that we set the budget at an oil production of 1.6%. As at July, the average production is 1.26%. The oil price benchmark we had set was appropriated at 73%. The actual price that has been achieved is 110 $1.45 for a barrel. Exchange rate that we had projected to be at 410 naira 15 kobo is currently an average of 424 naira and 48 kobo. So inflation that we projected to be at 16.11% is currently at as at July at 20.77%. But we've just released the CPI report for August, and August is reporting 23.3%. GDP growth that we projected at 3.55%, the actual GDP growth is 3.54%. That is as at second quarter, June 2022. The actual average crude oil price is higher than the benchmark. However, the higher oil prices is offset in the case of Nigeria by low oil output, which as at June is at 1.2 million barrels per day. NNPC attributes this fall in oil production in on the high incidence of crude oil theft and pipeline vandalization. But we've also seen recent reports that with increased security operation, that the crude oil production will begin to pick up, and we're tracking the numbers. Exchange rate inflation and GDP growth varied adversely from target. Growth is, however, expected to accelerate given efforts to contain structural issues impacting adversely on the cost of doing business in Nigeria. Let me give you an update of the 2022 budget performance. On revenue, as at August 2022, the federal government retained revenue was 4.23 trillion. This represents 64% of the prorated target for the period. The federal government share of oil revenue was 395.06 billion, representing 27.1% of the prorated target for the period, while non-oil tax revenues total 1.549 trillion, reporting a performance of 102.9%, that is slightly above the target. This performance is largely contributed by company income tax and VAT that are reporting performances of 136.3% above target for the company income tax, and while the VAT is trailing the target at 99.6%. Customs revenue, on the other hand, which is the performance is 83%, that is 17% below target. 17% is 102.51 billion below the target set for customs for prorated to August 2022. Other revenues amounting to 2.19 trillion, of which these are actual collections, of which independent revenue contribution, that is revenue from government-owned enterprises, it is 866.16 billion. On the expenditure performance, the aggregate expenditure for the 2022 budget was set as 17.32 trillion. And if you prorate it to August, it means 11.55 trillion at the end of August. The actual spending as at the end of August is 9.56 trillion. This is about 83% of the prorated target. And of this spending, 3.52 trillion was for debt service, 2.89 trillion was for personnel cost and including pensions, while 1.78 billion was released for capital expenditure. And this is as at August. The fiscal deficit for the 2022 period to August is, for the year, is 7.35 trillion. To August, the prorated target will have been 5.33 trillion. As at August, the deficit is slightly above target by 430.82 billion. The level of borrowing as at August is 1.23 trillion ahead of the July target, ahead of the August target. What we've done is we front-loaded our borrowing to enable us release capital expenditures, capital funding earlier, so that the MDAs will have a longer time in which to implement their programs and projects. So the borrowing has tapered down for the rest of the year. Let me now move to the key assumptions and the macroeconomic framework underlying the 2023 budget proposal. The key parameters, as well as other macro projections driving the medium-term revenue and expenditure framework, have been revised to take into reality the emerging realities. The new figures includes the oil price benchmark of $70 compared to 73 for 2022, while the oil production is 1.69 million barrels per day compared to 1.6 million for 2022. And I'm looking only at the 2023 figures. This presentation will be posted on the website, so you can look at the details. Inflation, which we had set in 2022 at 16.7, we have adjusted upwards to 17.16% at 2023, and we're still holding down to this. Even though inflation is rising, our projection is it will soon plateau and begin to go down. So 2023 is projected to average 17.16%. The non-oil GDP will be 216 trillion, while the oil GDP will be 11.4 trillion. And growth is projected to be at 3.75% compared to 3.55%. I'm sure people will be wondering why we are projecting that the Nigerian economy will grow when the global economy is declining. We still have a couple of strong macroeconomic indicators. And we also have an election that is ongoing. Election actually reflates the economy. Some of the parameters underlying the 2023 projections deviate from the projections in the National Development Plan for 2021 to 2025. And this is so because we have to take into account a combination of the current realities and also a modified outlook that we have been compelled to look at. For instance, while the real GDP is projected to be at 3.75% in 2022, compared to what we had in the development plan at 4.39%. Growth was expected to moderate to 3.3% in 2024 before picking up to 3.4%. So when you compare the budget projections and the National Development Plan, there are a few moderations that we had to make to take into account current realities. Inflation in the National Plan was 14.93%, but we have had to adjust it upwards to 17.16% to conform to the new realities. Sustained upward pressure on prices is expected to be driven by the current lag effect of the global price surge due to the war in Ukraine, also domestic insecurity in our case, and the rising cost of imports, as well as exchange rate depreciation and other supply side constraints. Growth in nominal consumption has also been adjusted in line with revised estimates based on the components of the GDP and the historical performances. The nominal consumption is projected to be 121.93 trillion for 2023. Investments, especially from foreign sources, are expected to be dragged down by interest rate hikes in advanced economies. Foreign exchange management concerns and other domestic challenges, including insecurity. I'll now move on to the report on the overview of the 2023 budget. The projected fiscal outcome for 2023 is based on a PMS subsidy scenario, which we had presented to FEC and to Parliament, and it was approved. In the 2023 budget, we had assumed that PMS subsidy will remain up to the middle of 2023, based on the 18 months extension that was announced by government early 2022. In this regard, only 3.36 trillion has been provided for PMS subsidy for the year 2023. There will also be tighter enforcement of performance management framework for government-owned enterprises that will significantly increase operating surplus, as well as dividend remittances during the year 2023. So total revenue that will be available to fund the 2023 budget is estimated at 9.73 trillion naira. This includes gross revenue of 63 government-owned enterprises that is proposed at 3.48 trillion. Of this, the federal government oil revenue share is projected to be 1.92 trillion, while non-oil taxes are estimated at 2.43 trillion, and federal government independent revenues are projected to be at 2.21 trillion. Other revenues totaling 768 billion are also projected in the revenue. The government-owned enterprises are projected to remit 1.06 trillion to FGN's Consolidated Revenue Fund and retain 2.42 trillion for their expenditures as well as their reserves. In aggregate, 20% of the projected revenue is expected from oil-related sources, while 80% will be earned from non-oil sources. So this, again, is emphasizing part of the progress that the DG has reported earlier on, what we have been able to achieve in terms of turning our revenue performance from oil to non-oil. When we started, the first budget that we did, 2015, was 70% oil revenue and 30% non-oil revenue. So today, we're at 20% oil revenue and 80% non-oil revenue. And it has been a long journey. Some of the things that have been achieved have been earlier on enumerated by the DG budget. The 2022 aggregate federal government expenditure, inclusive of government-owned enterprises and project-tied loans, is projected to be 20.51 trillion naira. And this is 18.4% higher than the amended 2022 budget. The recurrent non-debt spending estimated to amount to, so this is salaries and pensions, is estimated to be at 8.49 trillion, inclusive of 20 billion social investment fund. The aggregate capital expenditure of 5.34 trillion is 26% of the total expenditure. This is below our set target of 30%, but this 26% also includes the capital expenditure component of the statutory transfers, agencies such as the, arms of government such as the National Assembly, as well as the judiciary, government-owned enterprises capital expenditure, as well as project-tied loan disbursements that are projected to be done in 2023. At 6.31 trillion, debt service is 30.8% of total expenditure. This is 71.2% higher than the 2022 estimate, as it includes interest of 1.1 trillion for the ways and means from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Overall, the budget deficit is 10.78 trillion for 2023, and this represents 4.78% of GDP. Again, this is higher than the 3% that is set by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But the same Fiscal Responsibility Act has allowed the president to increase the 3% to GDP threshold if, in the opinion of the president, that the economy is going through through an emergency. The budget deficit is to be financed mainly by domestic borrowing as well as foreign borrowings. Domestic borrowing at 7.04 trillion, while foreign borrowing is at 1.76 trillion. Multilateral and bilateral loans already secured and being implemented, the drawdowns from these loans will be 1.77 trillion. Proceeds from privatization will be 206.18 billion naira. As envisaged by law, there is a continuous need to exceed the threshold, considering the existential issues of security challenges facing the country today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to speak to you briefly about debt management. Nigeria's public debt maturity profile is within the limits set by the debt management strategy. The debt management strategy is a medium-term strategy that is undertaken and approved by the Debt Management Board as well as the Federal Executive Council. The total debt portfolio of our country today is at 102 billion US dollars. That is both domestic and I don't know if this is clear. Next slide, please. I'm at slide number 26. Okay. It's at 102 billion US dollars. Of this debt, the total debt size of Nigeria. Okay, thank you very much. Of the total debt size, 35% is foreign, 65% is domestic. Of the foreign debt, 48% of our foreign debt is multilateral loans, that is loans from concessionary sources such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, loans that you get at tenors of 25 years, interest rate of 1.5% or 1.25%, 5 to 7 years moratorium. So we have 48% of our debts in that stock. Then we have the bilateral loans, so loans from China, from Japan, from France, and such like at 12% of the foreign debt stock. While the commercial loans, that is the debt that we raise euro bonds in the international capital market, are at 39%. So the majority of Nigeria's debt is domestic debt. And this limits our foreign exchange differential exposure. We've also worked over time under the debt management strategy to rebalance our portfolio to longer tenured loans as opposed to shorter tenured loans. And this means we're able to stretch out our repayment obligations to give the country better fiscal room. Debt service to revenue ratio has been of great concern to everybody in the country. So while our total debt stock today is 25%, and we have got approval by His Excellency the President to include the borrowing from the central bank ways and means. Even when we add that, the debt stock will be at 35%. We have set for ourselves a maximum debt limit of 40% of GDP. What the Brentwood institutions, as the World Bank and the IMF, projects for countries like Nigeria as healthy is borrowing levels of 55% of GDP. And I must say that most of our comparators are way above this. Some are at 70%, some are close to 100%. So we have been very prudent in terms of the borrowing, trying to stay within the limits set by the debt management strategy. Today, the total public debt as a percentage of GDP stands at 23.06% as of June 2022. And this again is within the threshold of 55% set by the World Bank and the IMF, but it's also within the limits that we have set ourselves, which is 40% in our debt management strategy. And even when we include the ways and means, it will also not be more than 35%. The exposure of the total debt portfolio to manage our exchange rate remains moderate, as the share of domestic debt in the public and to the total public debt comprises 60%. The targeted ratio in our medium-term plan is 70-30, but we are 70-40, which means we still have room to further borrow more locally and less internationally. The exposure to refinancing risk remains stable, and as a result of the strategy of the issuance of long-dated instruments in the domestic and international markets, adding to longer-term funds from multilateral and bilateral loans, we have been able to, in the last Eurobond issue instruments of up to 30 years, even in the international capital market. And also in the domestic market, we have been issuing long-tenured loans, and they have been very popular in terms of uptake, especially by long-standing investors like pension funds. We also have introduced a safeguard for ourselves that guarantees that federal government gives for any financing, for any investment in Nigeria should be a maximum of 5% of GDP. Today, what we have been able to attain is 2.64%. So we're still within very healthy thresholds in all of the parameters that are key to ensure debt sustainability. The federal government's contingent liability, so this guarantees that we issued they might not be direct borrowing by government, but because we give the guarantee, it becomes a contingent liability for us, is at 2.6% as at 2022. And Nigeria is, 2021, I beg your pardon, Nigeria is not planning on restructuring its debt as it remains within healthy limits, and also we remain committed to meeting our domestic obligations. Let me say that debt is provided for in our annual, debt service is provided for in our annual appropriations. And also in terms of disbursement of funds, it is a first line charge. So that is how we've been able to continuously ensure that we meet our domestic as well as foreign debt service obligations. The federal government will continue to utilize appropriate debt management tools to streamline the cost and the risk profile in the debt portfolio, including leaning more on concessionary loans, spreading out of maturities to avoid bunching so that you don't have too many instruments maturing at any particular point in time, and also reprofiling the maturities by refinancing short-term loans to long-term debt instruments. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just report on what we're doing to drive revenues. Because as I said earlier on, our debts are within healthy limits. The problem we have is in the revenue side, because our debt service to revenue is putting a lot of pressures on the operations of government. So we have the strategic revenue growth initiatives, which is a suite of initiatives that has been designed to maximize the revenue potential in our country to move our revenue to GDP ratio to 15%. So on tax revenues, non-oil revenues remain more stable than oil revenues, and we have proven that over and over again. To improve non-oil revenues, receipts for from taxes have improved, and efforts will be sustained to expand the non-oil revenues. In addition, the tax system will be further strengthened over the medium term by improving efficiency in collection, enhancing compliance, and reorganizing the business practices of the revenue agencies, as well as employing appropriate technology. Further efforts also will be brought to bring more businesses and the informal sector into the tax net. On customs revenue, in the medium term, the Nigerian Customs Service will introduce frameworks for recovering duties and other fees as appropriate from transactions conducted over electronic networks. The federal government will also further enhance ports efficiency, strengthening anti-smuggling measures, as well as review tariffs and waivers and issue more licenses to build more and newer modern port terminals within existing ports, and also new ports outside of Lagos. Independent revenues of federal government have hit over the 1 trillion naira mark in 2021, and this is a process that will continue. To further enhance independent revenue generation, we will continue to maximize the huge potentials and optimize the operational and collection efficiencies of the government-owned enterprises. In many countries, GOEs operate very efficiently and generate significant revenues to fund government budgets. Exempt laws limiting cost to revenue ratio to a maximum of 50% has been enacted and are being enforced from the Finance Act 2020. Technology and ICT solutions will be effectively deployed to ensure compliance and enhance existing and new revenue streams. The performance of GOEs will also be further enhanced by a more effective implementation of the approved performance management framework. For the past 3 years, we have developed a practice of enacting finance acts to support the implementation of the annual budgets. We are working and we are at the final stage of the Finance Act 2022. Yesterday, we held a stakeholder consultation, and in the next couple of days, we should be holding more consultations and going for approvals at FEC and then submit, as directed by Mr. President, the Finance Bill 2022 to the National Assembly. So the indicated policy focus for the next finance bill should be, it will be the final Finance Act of this administration, and we hope that subsequent administrations will continue with this practice of enacting finance acts. Given the current state of the polity, it is important to focus this time around on critical macro fiscal reforms to spur vital investments in healthcare, in climate change, as well as in green growth. Fiscal reforms are also included, will be included in the finance bill to spur job creation for youths, for women, and for small and medium enterprises. Long overdue tax reform incentives will be pivotal in this Finance Act. We are looking at introducing incentives for modern and new economics, and also reducing the incentives for matured sectors. So in the healthcare sector, there are a number of incentives that we have already identified. In the climate change sector, there are a number of incentives like the completion of the non-fiscal reforms to reduce greenhouse emissions, facilitating domestic and international investments in climate adaptation and mitigation. In the healthcare sector, the improvement in the ease of doing business and other reforms to support investments in the health sector as well as in health infrastructure, complement quality healthcare and insurance and other systemic reforms, as well as facilitate domestic and international investments in quality healthcare infrastructure and healthcare systems. Reforming tax incentives. We're looking at phasing out antiquated, pioneer, and other tax incentives for mature industries. Through economic governance reforms, we're going to reduce some of the tax expenditures and revenues that we have been foregoing to support the fiscal situation. And based on statistics, we are going to gradually transition away from expensive and redundant tax incentives. To spur job creation and economic growth, we are looking at, again, further refinement of the ease of doing business, specifically to support micro, small, medium enterprises and enterprises for youth and women-owned businesses, with specific focus on fintech, ICT, entertainment, fashion, sports, arts, and such like. We're also looking at restructuring the NYSC to be able to support a diaspora scheme that is being considered relating to NYSC, to create jobs as well as to facilitate inbound capital and investments into the economy from the diasporas. On tax administration and other fiscal reforms, again, further refinement on the ease of doing business and other reforms that will enhance our tax administration, but also introduction of targeted fiscal and non-fiscal reforms to amend, address, and cure defects in existing tax and non-tax laws and regulations, and also curtailing some of the reliefs that we have had to provide during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because reliefs that are provided by government should be targeted and should be time-bound. They shouldn't be existing on an unlimited basis. So there are several options that we're looking at, and like I said, even yesterday, we had a public consultation, and after each consultation, we review what is planned and adjust on the go. We also have to consult with the National Assembly. We're also trying to make sure that we're linking the finance bill to not just the national budget, but also to the national plan, to be able to meet those medium-term targets as set in the National Development Plan. Let me just report on some of the critical sectoral allocations in the 2023 budget, and the details again will be posted on the website of the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, as well as the Budget Office of the Federation. So for the education sector, there's an aggregate provision of 2.05 trillion, and this represents 10% of the federal government's budget. This 2.05 trillion includes 1.23 trillion for the ministry and its agencies, both recurrent and capital, 95.0 billion for the Universal Basic Education, UBEC, and then 248.27 billion for TET Fund, while we have provided 470 billion for tertiary education revitalization, as well as salary enhancements. For the health sector, we have provided 1.58 trillion, and this represents 8% of the federal government's budget. Of this 1.58 trillion, 1.41 trillion is amount provided for the ministry itself and its agencies, recurrent and capital, but also 69.75 billion for the Gavi immunization counterpart funding, as well as other donor products that require support that require counterpart funding. We also have provided 47.65 billion transfer for the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund. This is 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Other allocations include the allocations to the defense and security sector, 2.74 trillion. This is 13% of the budget. The amount provision includes the amount provided for the military, for the police, for the intelligence agency, as well as the paramilitary agencies. That's both recurrent and capital. Provisions for infrastructure is 998.93 billion, representing 5% of the budget. And this includes provisions for works and housing, power, transport, water resources, and aviation. Provisions made for the social development and poverty reduction, 756 billion, representing 4% of the budget. This amount is provided for the National Social Investment Program, as well as the National Poverty Reduction and Growth Strategy programs. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the draft 2023 budget has been prepared against the backdrop of continued global challenges occasioned by the lingering COVID-19 pandemic, as well as higher food and fuel prices due to the war in Ukraine. The overall fiscal risks are somewhat elevated, following weaker than expected domestic economic performance and structural issues in the domestic economy. Early passage of the budget for implementation by the 1st of January will significantly contribute towards completion of legacy projects of this administration, as well as enhanced smooth transition and achievements of government macro, fiscal, and sectoral objectives. Revenue generation remains the major fiscal constraint of the Federation, and therefore this budget and the plan is paying special attention to revenue. The systemic resource mobilization problem has been compounded by the past two recessions that we had faced, but we will continue to focus on aggressive revenue drive. Efforts will also, however, focus on improved tax administration as well as collection efficiency. Crude oil production challenges and PMS subsidy deductions by the NMPC constitute a very significant threat to the achievements of our revenue growth targets as seen in the 2022 performance up to August. Collectively, we must take bold, decisive, and very, very urgent action to urgently address the revenue underperformance and expenditure efficiency at both national as well as subnational levels. However, our government remains mindful of the need to provide safety nets to cushion the impact of the reform measures on the vulnerable segments of our population. The goal of the fiscal interventions will be carried on to further stimulate the economy through carefully calibrated regulatory policy measures that will be designed to boost domestic value addition, to de-risk enterprise environment, to attract external investments, and also to improve our source of funding. We welcome citizens' participation in enhancing budget implementation and monitoring via the following platforms, as you can see in the screen, the iMonitor, as well as the Citizens Budget Monitoring app that will be available on Google Store. And details of the 2023 budget proposals will be available on the website of the Budget Office of the Federation, as well as the website of the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention.
An incisive presentation such as that deserves a better round of applause, please. The budget is a collective document for Nigeria and friends of Nigeria. And it's so nice to have the government welcoming citizens' participation in the budget. Track it, mark it, ask questions. What's happening? Where is it happening? And where projects have been listed in the process of execution. Follow up on those projects and take photographs. Thankfully, there's the mark it and send it to all relevant agencies. That's the way to participate. Please, once more, a round of applause for the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budgets and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Shanshima Ahmed, CON. Remember that this is a hybrid. It is a hybrid event. We have participants online and on site. Well, amongst those who are online, before I move to those who are online, permit me once again, he has been here for a while and I erroneously passed him over. Permit me recognize and respectfully once again welcome Mr. Victor Morocco, Chairman, Fiscal Responsibility Commission. Mr. Victor, sir, you're welcome. Thank you very much, sir. And for those who are connected online, we have the Honorable Minister, Youth, Sports and Social Development, Dr. Sunday Dare. Let's show them love. They might not be here, but they are watching. We also have the Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Osage Hanire. We have the Honorable Minister of State Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timipre Silva. We have the Honorable Minister for Labor and Employment, Dr. Chris Ngige. We have the Permanent Secretary Interior, Mr. Belgore. We have the Permanent Secretary, CMO, in the Office of the Head of Service, Dr. Meribole. We have the Permanent Secretary, Health, Mr. Maman. We have the Chairman, National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission, Mr. Ekbonta. We have the Special Assistant to the President, the Special Advisor, I beg your pardon, to the President on Economic Affairs, Dr. Yemi Dikbolu. We have the Director General, Debt Management Office, Patience Oniha. We have the Managing Director, NDIC, Mr. Bello Hassan. We have the Group CEO, Nigeria Stock Exchange Group, Mr. Onyema. We have a foremost economist, Professor Akpan Hogan Ekpo, former Vice Chancellor, University of Uyo. We have another leading economist, Dr. Ayo Tariba. We have the former purse-setting chairman of the FIRS, Ifeko Omogui. We have a tax partner, Deloitte West Africa, Yomi Olugbenro. All these and much more. We also have you, and you. Please, a round of applause for yourselves. We also have the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Niger Delta, Funsho Adebi. He's here, is here. So where are you? Please, could we see where you are? Okay, please, a round of applause for him. So you're welcome. Well, we have now come to the point where you ask questions. This is no sponge where you come and you sponge and you go away. No way. We need your contributions. What do you want to know? So please, as you raise your hand, okay, I would have assisting me, my own boss, the one who is directing me. I might be the voice, but he's the hand. Mr. Afolabi Olajuwon, Fellow, Nigeria Institute of Public Relations. Sir, the hands are up. Where do we start from? Okay, from there. So we'll start from the first rung where Elizabeth Atte, Voice of Nigeria, is. The hand who is on that bench. Please, sir, could you ask your question? Introduce yourself, the medium you represent. Keep it short, simple, straight to the point. Don't stray out of what we are discussing here. And please, permit me, sir, also to intimate everyone, please mind the use of your language. Don't bring anger outside of here to this fora. Thank you. Sir, you may continue.
I will not use Okwa Ibom language. I want to use English language. My name is Basi Udo. I write for Media Tracknet Nigeria. Madam Minister, as you were presenting, you told us that 3.3 trillion naira will be used for fuel subsidy. So immediately my children, 2 children that have just come out from the Edmond strike of the ASU, heard that, they called. They want me to find out from you if 3.3 trillion has been provided for fuel subsidy and 2.05 trillion was provided for education sector. We want to find out how much of that figure is provided for ASU crisis resolution so that we will not go back to where we've just come from. Thank you. Is it 2.20 or 1.0?
Okay, so we will take, the Honorable Minister, with your kind permission, we will take 3 questions, have responses, and we go to the next batch of questions. Also, do we have more? Okay, we take 4. So we move to the next row. Yes, sir?
I am Benjamin Muteme, Blueprint Newspapers. Minister, on behalf of the media people present, we are flattered by you calling us your brothers and sisters. And my question is, in the course of the presentation, you said NNPC deduction continues to pose a risk to revenue targets. And if that's the case, I want to know, is there a mechanism to really monitor NNPC and know the exact amount they spend as subsidy? Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take the 2 hands right after there, the man in brown, and then the lady. Okay, there's the lady. So let's do a gender mix. Madam, you, right after his back. Yes, you.
Okay. Good morning, Minister. I'm Olatokewa Ayuade from Kiss FM Radio.
Sorry, yeah. Madam, we didn't get your name.
Olatokewa Ayuade from Kiss FM Radio. Yeah, I must start with commending the Minister that for this 2023 budget, we are going to take only 20% from oil, while the 80% is from non-oil revenue. I think that's commendable. But I have 2 or 3 questions there. In the 2022 projection for subsidy, 15.7 billion was projected. I just want to know, is it still wise for us to continue to subsidize for fuel? Then on tax, 2 years back at this same budget presentation, we were talking about tax, and I asked you about property tax. We have so many houses unoccupied. What are we doing about it? I would like to know. Then thirdly, you talked about, what we are going to do concerning the budget, how to mop up more revenue from taxes. And I just want to advise that, because for the MSMEs and small businesses, hope we are not going to also tax them more, because they are already lamenting. agencies like NAFDAC and other agencies is making it difficult for MSMEs to thrive. And if we are going to still be taking more from looking at tax to generate more, are we not looking at other aspects to actually get more for the budget for 2023? Thank you.
Question with passion. Sir, you are the last for this session, the man in brown.
I have two very quick questions. Number one, how much does our ways and means stand at? Then two, could you give us a little insight into the program that the federal government is planning for the NYC, which you mentioned? Thank you.
The program, is it the diaspora wing of it?
Please.
Please, members of the press, could you transfer your microphones over to the table because the answers will be taken from the table. Thank you so very much. While they are doing that, I cannot help but commend some of the things I heard, that we are still 40% under the debt, while some other countries have exceeded to 70%. Please, a round of applause for our finance managers. Why are you grumbling? Some of you are owing. Why are you grumbling? Don't grumble too much, you're owing. Your landlord should not tell your story, you won't sit here. Well, while you're still setting up, permit me recognize in our midst the presence of my permanent secretary, Federal Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Information and Culture, Mrs. Lydia Jaffia, MMI. Mrs. Lydia, MNI, where is she? I greet you, good morning, ma'am. Also, we have here in our midst the Permanent Secretary, Special Duties, Head of Service, Engineer Farouk Yusuf Yabo. Please, a round of applause to them. Members of the press, are you set? Can she answer the questions, though? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, my brothers and sisters from the press. And I'll start with my brother Basi, and he can confirm to you that he's my brother. We go a long way back. Yes. And Mr. Basi's question, Basi Udo, was we had provided 3.3 trillion to be used for fuel subsidy, and that is so. And I think it's not news that for us on the fiscal side, this is something we wish we don't have to do. But we also are living in a nation and have different arms of government, and we have to do what is practical. And it is our responsibility to make these provisions. So while we have provided 3.3 trillion for fuel subsidy, we have also provided 2.05 trillion for the education sector. Included in this provision is 470 billion specifically to pay the increment, just the increment portion of the adjustment of the salaries, as well as the revitalization that was negotiated with ASU. This is in addition to the regular salary. So if you take in the regular salaries, the total provision will be 515 billion naira. On the question from Benjamin from Blueprint, you said, what have we done to ensure that we're able to track the deductions that are made by the NMPC? The NMPC is still saddled with the responsibility of providing refined petroleum products for use in country. And what the NMPC does is they use revenue that they generate from sale of crude to buy these products, and it means that is revenue that is not available to be remitted to the Federation. The provision that we have made is based on the numbers provided by NMPC on truck outs of 65 million liters per day of PMS per day at the NAFEX exchange rate for half of the year. That's how we did the computation. Our solution is to just get out of this subsidy regime. Whichever way you cut it, The regulators now, the Midstream Downstream Regulatory Authority, has made a commitment that they are putting in place measures to be able to track the distribution of petroleum products to the fuel stations and report on the actual consumption. So the provision we have made in the budget is of truckouts as provided by the NMPC. And we have this monthly Presidential Reconciliation Committee that reconciles with all the revenue generating agencies what they have generated and what they remit to the Federation. NMPC is part of that process. The next question from Ola Teka again, it had to do with the subsidy, but you asked a more substantial question, what are we doing about property tax? Property tax is within the sphere of the states. By the provision of our constitution, it is the states that have the mandate to collect property tax. Unfortunately, for the federal government, we're not able to collect property tax. But we're happy that a lot of states are making great effort at collecting property tax by automating their land registries, enabling them to really identify who owns what and be able to tax them appropriately. On MSME tax, the Finance Act 2020, if you recall, made provisions for tax rebates for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Smallest enterprises that have turnover of 25 billion pay zero company income tax, and medium-sized businesses that have turnover up to 100 billion pay a reduced tax rate of 20%. So we reduce their tax rate from 30% to 20%. So we have provided the fiscal relief, and government is doing that at great cost because this is revenue that will have accrued to the Federation that we have foregone to enable these enterprises to be able to survive, to grow, to keep employment, and even employ more people. Mr. Ima wanted to know some details about the review of the program we're doing on the NYSC. I want to invite my colleague who has joined us virtually, the Honorable Minister of Youth and Sports Development, to respond to that question. I think that's all the questions for now. So may I invite the Mr. Sunday Dari, are you online? Okay, yeah, on the ways and means, the total waste, that's from Ima Vanguard. The total waste and means today is 20 trillion, and we have approval to securitize this. The securitization will be over a 40-year period with interest rate of 9%. But over the years, we have been paying the interest component at the current rates that is charged on the ways and means. May I invite Honorable Minister of Youth and Sports, Mr. Sunday Dare, to please respond to the question on what is being done to improve on the current structure of the NYSC. Honorable Minister. Is he on?
As soon as able to bring him on, we can continue.
Okay, can we continue? As soon as he's able to come on, we'll give him the floor to continue. But I like to say, just briefly, before he comes on, this initial adjustment we're trying to achieve is for diasporas. Currently, the NYSC Act has a provision that says that you must serve within 3 years of graduation. So we have people that are living in diaspora that go beyond these 3 years. And the immediate past Director General of the NYSC began a process that was indicating that they have gone against the law and actually wanted to take people up on that. And our view is that that is discouraging diasporas from coming back home and bringing investments. that instead we should redesign the program. If we have to amend the law, we will, and we're looking at doing that in the Finance Act, to enable a diasporan to come back anytime they're ready to be able to serve. We'll just change the condition of serving. Instead of paying them allowances, they can serve for free. Instead of coming to serve and be assigned to a school or an agency, we can encourage them to come and set up small businesses and actually employ people, and that would be NYSC that they will be serving, and they get the certificates at the end of the period. So that's roughly what is being considered. But the minister has a larger restructuring of the NYSC that he's also looking at. So when he comes on, we'll still invite him to speak to the meeting.
Very much, our Honorable Minister. Remember, it is a hybrid event. So we will take a moment to go online, because we have online the Group CEO, Nigeria Stock Exchange Group, Mr. Onyema, who has a question. Mr. Onyema?
Just run as if you were there. Recall, we can't always be here forever, and we must be to last. So guys, let's build processes and organizations and surround ourselves with great minds to help us run businesses. So to young African entrepreneurs, embrace this and you go far.
This is Tony Liman.
Are we sure we...
often ask me, Tony.
Are we sure we have Mr. Oscar Onyema, please?
No,
I don't think that was Oscar
somebody
Onyema.
linked up us to another program, I'm sure.
Well, while we try to sort out the online segment...
May I request that maybe they should have the questions written in the chat box, and then it can be read out. It might be more effective.
Okay, please, for everyone who is online and has a question, please send them to the chat box. It won't get missing there. We will read them out and have those involved respond to them. But now, permit me to recognize Mr. Tokpe Fasha, who has a question also. Mr. Tokpe?
Ask me, Tony.
They have a problem.
I can see the minister of
Youth and Sport.
what's going on.
All right, sir. Please.
Thank you very much. I came late, so I had to suffer the punishment, which is good. Very quickly, Madam Minister, I have a kind of accounting challenge with the budget, not just this one, even previous ones, to the extent that I wonder why the only assumption...
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. Dr. Tokpe Fasha, please. Dr. Tokpe Fasha. Thank you very much, ma'am. The only assumption, the only overriding assumption continues to be crude oil, how much we want to get and how much we want to sell. However, I wonder, like I was here the last time you did this presentation, and I did say that it is a bit dangerous to present that, because Nigerians sort of assume that the entire 1.69 million barrels accrue to the federal government, and therefore you cannot blame them if we blame us if we bring a calculator and we calculate how much the government is getting, forgetting that according to NEITI, only 30% of that actually accrues to the federal government. So it's a sucker punch for the federal government. You set yourself up and people are going to blame you for that. And I think that perhaps we need one more assumption. After the 1.69 million, $70 a day, another assumption for how much percentage of that will come to Nigeria. And it is that figure that should then drive the budget. And I also wonder, Madam Minister, given your efforts in the non-oil sector and the fact that the non-oil sector seems to be contributing more, why are we not having deliberate assumptions that drive the non-oil sector, even the GOEs, to make it into that budget on the revenue side, rather than just the crude oil, and then we move into the expenditure side? So I wonder what you can do about that. Also, I wanted to know what you're doing, or what we're going to be doing, maybe to get the GOEs, the government-owned enterprises, to remit better. The president actually made a statement on that when he delivered the budget at the National Assembly, that some of the GOEs have become rather independent of the presidency. Lastly, that NNPC is supposed to be a limited liability company. Do we still expect them to do monthly remittances, or as a limited liability company, we should expect only the dividends and taxes that they remit? And also that the 470 billion you are providing for universities, it seems obvious that the federal government may really have to let the universities go, because you probably will never be able to fulfill their demands. I wrote an article recently that the idea of federal universities is actually a colonial hangover. Federal government should not be getting so deeply involved in that intellectual sector, which will allow them to fly. I hope that we begin to let them go at some point in time. Thank you very much for the audience.
Thank you, Dr. Tokwe. That's some double barrel questions coming like ricocheting bullets there. But, Honorable Minister, ma'am, with your kind permission, I'd like to read some of the messages we have in our chat box. This one says, my name is Chijoke Onoha, a young Nigerian hopeful for a fruitful future for our country. In terms of tax revenue generation, why and how, in brackets, concrete steps with timelines, does the federal government intend to grow tax revenue from the informal sector? Note that the ease of doing business by the informal sector in Nigeria is not generally favorable, which has been further reduced by the poor macroeconomic trends. We also have another one from Sahid Tajuddin from Lagos, addressed to the Honorable Minister of Finance. It says, having listened to your presentation, I'd like to ask, what are the measures put in place for SMEs to cushion the effect of current economic challenges being faced as a result of multiple taxes? Thank you. We also have this one from Ugochi Ndebio, and it says, what is driving our assumption that inflation from, it didn't complete that, something must have gone missing there. And then we now move to another one from Gbemisola Joel Oshoba of One Campaign. Can the Honorable Minister please expatiate on how informal businesses will be brought into the tax net? What role will digitalization play? How can existing infrastructure like NIN and BVN be leveraged for this? Honorable Minister, I hear that Oscar Onyema is online now, okay. So maybe we take a break to take him. Mr. Oscar?
And the Minister.
And good morning, Honorable Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The question is really about the debt to revenue ratio. Honorable Minister, you had mentioned that, but I'm curious to know what the current ratio is, and to also know if there is a cap, a maximum ratio that the government has in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, you have that. So let me return to this one, maybe the last one on this batch. And this one is coming from Ambassador Tokumbo Lijado Yemade, Country President for Kings of Africa for Development and Reintegration. And it is asking, we are interested in details of the diaspora. And still talking the diaspora, there's one from Rotimi, said the Honorable Minister made some comments about NYC reforms as well as some diaspora initiatives. Can you kindly shed more light on this? What is this diaspora initiative and what is the NYC reforms focused on? Honorable Minister, I'll move over to you.
May I ask that we start from the back end on the NYC diaspora to invite the Honorable Minister of Youth and Sports, whom I've just seen online now, so that he can have a chance to respond to the reforms of the NYC. Since it seems to be working now, right? HM Youth and Sports, please. Mr. Sunday Dare. Mr. Sunday Dare, please, can you respond to the question that was asked regarding reforms at the NYSC, especially relating to the diasporas? Looks like you're muted.
Please, could we unmute him, please?
We still can't hear
So we
you.
can see you, but we can't hear you. I think it's connectivity issues, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, since I started from the back end, let me continue by responding to Oscar Onyema from the Nigerian Securities Exchange. And what you're asking, what is the current debt service to revenue ratio? So as at 31st of August, the debt service to revenue ratio is 83%. And that's why I said what we have is a revenue problem. And we have to do everything we can to increase our revenue. Our policy target is to keep it at no more than 50% over the medium term period, and ultimately reduce it down to 30%. But we're currently over 50% debt service to revenue. And Chijoke Onoha, you asked why and how we will grow revenues from the informal sector. It's first of all to try to get the sector formalized. So that's one of the reasons why we made provisions for free registration and online registration, so you can actually go to the CAC website and register. If you have all the documents within, is it 48 hours, that you get your certificate. So once you register, the process of registration includes you provide a TIN identification number, you provide the information like your account number, and I think BVN also is provided in the registration process. So once you do those registration, then it's easier to track those companies. And since that provision was given, the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment is reporting that there are more of these informal sector operators that are now formalized. Remember that I said we granted tax rebates for small businesses, but the businesses were still expected to file in returns to show that their turnover is below those thresholds that are either entitled to 0 CIT or 20% CIT. So gradually, the tax net is able to record some of this informal sector players. And more currently, the Joint Tax Board is working. So the Joint Tax Board is chaired by the chairman FRS, with each state a chair of inland revenue as a member. They're currently working at upgrading the process of tax identification number to include national identification number. And you know that there's a lot of progress that has been made in the national identification number registration process. The NIMSI reports that the numbers are now up to 84 million Nigerians that have been registered on the database. So there'll be a link between the NIN number and the tax identification number. So that's another way that we're going to be able to use to track taxpayers' registration as well as tax compliance. And it's gradually expanding the tax net as well. So we're able to check where a company has paid its tax, to look behind the company to the directors of the company, to also look at the tax compliance of the directors of the companies. He's here, okay. So Chairman FRS will speak to more of what they are doing in terms of expanding the tax net. Gwemisola from One Campaign asked, again, her question is, what are we doing to expand the tax net and bring more informal players into the formal sector, and also how do we use ICT to leverage? So FRS will please respond to the issue of what FRS is doing in terms of leveraging ICT to expand the tax net. And also, Ngochi asked, what are we doing to drive inflation? I guess maybe to curtail inflation, right?
Yes,
Not to
please.
drive inflation.
Yes.
So inflation is increasing. The largest component of inflation is the food inflation. And also what is driving food inflation is actually the cost of energy as well as the cost of transportation. So the higher the cost of diesel, the higher the cost of transportation, because goods that move from farms to market are transported with trucks that consume diesel. So what we have to do and what we're doing is try to see how we can provide some kind of measures that will help to reduce the cost of diesel. Again, the cost of these products are high because we're importing these products. We're not producing them locally. So our projection is when we get to the point by the first quarter of 2023, when we're able to produce refined products locally, that this cost will substantially reduce and it will impact the cost of transportation and will also have a similar impact on the cost of goods. The reports from the National Bureau of Statistics actually show that cost of products at the farm gates has actually reduced significantly. But when you now transport it to the market, it goes up and it ends up at high cost, and people are feeling that cost. The president is also has also directed us and the Ministry of Agriculture to look at how we can provide some kind of subsidy for some of the inputs in the form of fertilizer subsidy to reduce the farm cost itself to the farmer. Sahid Tajuddin's question was on SMEs. Chijoke Onoha's question was again, how do we grow the tax net again? So FRS, please take note. And Dr. Tokwe Fasha, a suite of questions. And I'm going to invite the DG Budget to respond to the questions from Dr. Tokwe Fasha, because it has to do with why are we making assumptions only for crude oil? Why are we not making assumptions why are we not reporting what just federal government is, what revenue is due to the federal government, and we'll explain to you in a short while. And also, why are we not showing the assumptions that we're making for the non-oil sector? And also, what are we going to do to get GOEs to remit better? Again, DG Budget, you can add to that, but I've also, even in my presentation, I spoke to the revenue to expenditure ratio of the GOEs and also how that has helped to bump up the revenue remittances, as well as the monthly reconciliations that we're doing. On NMPC, being a limited liability company, NMPC is not expected to continue to remit monthly to the Federation. They're expected to pay royalties like every oil and gas company, to pay taxes, and to also remit dividends. But there's a process that is ongoing. So NMPC has stopped remittances to the Federation. But the fact that the Federation still has assigned NMPs to bring refined petroleum products means what we are going to get in the forms of dividends and their own profit at the end of the day might also be impacted, because this is their own revenue that they are now using to fund the PMS. And if you listen to the GMD NMPC yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before yesterday on the panel, he said the Federation is owing him 1.3 trillion already on PMS subsidy, and Ministry of Finance should pay. I said, okay, we will reconcile, because you are also owing us another 6 trillion from FAC, so we'll sit down and do a reconciliation. So it's an ongoing discussion. On ASU, I wish ASU has been flying like several years ago, and I'm one of the people that really want to allow ASU to fly. But let's see how we move from there. DG Budget and then FIRS.
Thank you, Honourable Minister.
Do you want to just switch chairs?
Thank you, Honourable Minister. My friend Tokwe had a suite of questions, as he said. The first was he raised an issue about our seeming preoccupation with detailed assumptions around crude oil. Despite its declining significance as a contributor to federal government revenues. Two things. One is the Fiscal Responsibility Act actually makes some specific prescriptions about what we must provide, and the price of this principal export commodity, oil, is one of those that we're required to provide the assumptions around. Plus, maybe there's a bit of tradition there. The day you stop providing that information that Nigerians have forever gotten used to seeing in the MTF, you get accused of hiding, something. But it's important to say that despite oil's declining significance as a contributor to our GDP and government revenues, not so long ago, it was accounted for 70% of federal government's revenue. Now we're talking about 20%. But even 20% is still quite significant from one sector. But beyond its contribution to oil, to revenues, oil remains, the crude oil export remains our principal source of foreign exchange. And given the significant import dependence of the rest of the economy, even the non-oils of the economy, whether it's manufacturing or even the services sectors, it's important that we continue to keep a strong focus on this, important sector from that perspective. Ultimately, our goal is to be able to maximize our revenues from oil to support our diversification away from oil. But regarding the non-oil revenues, even though perhaps we don't speak as much, to those directly, within the same medium-term expenditure framework, you have some of the key assumptions, and then, if you read the full MTF document, you will see even the detailed assumptions. So, for instance, when we provide assumptions around nominal consumption, that's the basis for projecting, say, your VAT, for instance. So these are all some of the information that we actually, so all of those have underlying assumptions. None of those numbers gets pulled from the sky. So even if it's custom revenue, for instance, there are assumptions about throughput, about the exchange rate that is applicable, the value of the imports and all of that underlie, those, assumptions. But we'll take your point as going forward and put out, a lot more, detail around these non-oil revenue, the underlying assumptions. With respect to federal universities, let me clarify, because I think because of the focus on the 470 billion naira, which is a specific assumption comprising 300 billion naira for the revitalization, the program in the tertiary institutions, the upgrade of their infrastructure and all of, and 170 billion naira, which is estimated to be the cost of the upward adjustments in their salaries for 1 year. That's not the total budget for them. For instance, for universities, for university teachers, the regular budget for their salaries is about 415 billion naira. And that's provided in this budget outside of the 470 billion naira. The 470 billion naira does not include the regular budget for capital expenditure and overheads for the universities, nor does it include their internally generated revenues that they are allowed to retain and spend on such things as paying for their outsourced services for security and cleaning. With respect to GOE's remittance, as the Honorable Minister highlighted, we have, and this is a journey that we haven't got as much credit as we deserve for. I remember up until 6 years ago, the most in terms of revenues that came from these agencies, remittances, were about 200 billion naira. And when we insisted that there was a lot more and got more aggressive, the budget, we got a lot of criticism that we were being unrealistic about until we crossed the 1 trillion mark in 2021 and, have remained there, and we continue to push. We have even more aggressive targets this year. 2 years ago, the Finance Act imposed a cost-to-revenue ratio of 50% on most of these enterprises, which is a way of restricting how much expenditure they can. So there are very rigorous procedures now for them to be able to exceed that sort of ratio. And we have implemented now the direct deduction from their revenues, by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, which the pilot phase has gone through the past pilot phase, so we expect that will now be rolled out across all of them, and these should see, we expect in the remainder of this year to see, significant increases in the revenue coming from that. We have also, with effect from last year, introduced a special budget, system for them, based on the technology, which by itself, by that system, it's called the, BIMS, which limits their capacity, makes their budgeting more transparent and puts their budgets on a uniform template across board, and even had within it hard-coded these limits like the cost-to-revenue ratios. And as you heard, this got to Mr. President's speech before the National Assembly, where he called on the National Assembly to pay particular attention to the budgets of the GOEs and insisted that the practice in the past of the budgets of the GOEs being passed without, going through the presidency must stop. And so with all of this, we expect to see further improvements in the contribution of this sector to our revenues. Thank you.
Executive Secretary of FIRS is online to make contributions. Okay, the chairman of FIRS is online to respond to the questions that have been sent. No, she said he's online. Yes, please.
Well, while the chairman is coming on, I got a note because my colleague, Minister of Youth and Sports, couldn't join, but actually what he said is still the issue of, first of all, sorting out the diaspora for the NYSC, and also there's a larger review going on now under a committee that is looking at a more holistic review of the NYSC scheme itself. So just a feedback, which I got as a note. Is the chairman FRS on? I've seen hands raised.
There are hands raised, but the chairman is already there. But ma'am, before I go on, I return to on-site. Permit me just add this addendum sent by Ugochin Debut. She says, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. But my question includes, has proper data-driven analysis been conducted based on the actual financial performance of the affected industries to support the proposal to further review customs tariff, particularly excise? 2, have we considered the impact of such sudden policy revision may signal to investors, given that the 2022 Fiscal Policy Measures and Tariff Amendment, FPM 2022, was recently agreed for 2022 to 2024? Ma'am, that's a addendum to the question. It's now time to return on site. Gyang of NTA, I see your hand.
As the chairman FRS should first of all take the floor.
The chairman
Please,
FIRS,
just one
is he
moment
on?
here.
Is he on now,
Yeah, I
please?
see him indicating.
Technical. He's coming on. Okay.
Can you unmute the chairman FRS?
For technical, it reads Muhammad's iPad, in case you're looking for
Yes.
Who is handling this IT? Who is our host?
Online.
Someone in the corner. Someone in the corner. Okay, let's move on while they're trying to sort out the technology. Move on to the questions from the room.
Gyang NTA, please. She has been on standby.
Clearly, I'm the only NTA person here. My name is Leah Katung Babatunde,
Okay, hi,
and I
Leah.
report for the Nigerian Television Authority. Minister, I'm wondering, we have witnessed in the past several weeks some kinds of flood as never seen before. So clearly, we will be having more food issues in no time, and these issues will be accompanied by health, whether we like it or not, because water is washing out graves already, so clearly we might have a pandemic on our hands. So while we plan all these things, are we also planning for the effect of these, considering the fact that also some of the oil facilities have been affected, some power facilities have also been affected? Will this have an overall effect on the budget for next year? And secondly, what will be the kind of data that we would be using to drive this plan? There was no mention of the census. Are we still on track for that? Thank you.
Okay, we now return to the FIRS chairman, who is ready to respond to the question now. Technical?
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
So, thank you very much for having me on the issues of revenue. Before I start commenting on what FIRS is doing, or the federal government is doing to widen the taxing, I want to first of all clarify something, which is a conversation we're having around the revenue issue of challenges of revenue generation in Nigeria, or inadequacy of revenues that we have to run or to fund our budget. The clarification is that revenues have been generated at the federal level, but the revenues do not 100% belong to federal government. I want Nigerians to understand that if it were to be a revenue, the revenues were to be meant for funding the national budget, the agencies of government at the center are generating enough to be able to fund the 20 trillion budget for the year. But the revenues, as they are generated, some are remitted to Federation account by the Federal Revenue Generating Agency. So they are not there for federal government to keep. That is the first clarification. The second thing, which has to do with the issue of deployment of the widening of tax rate, is what we're already doing at FIRS and what we are planning to do at the Joint Task Force. At FIRS, we are already taking deployment of technology very seriously, and it is impacting positively on whatever we are doing, the business process, the tax filing, the auditing, and the revenue mobilization itself. You recall that for the first time last year, we generated 6.4 trillion naira. And as at August this year, we've gone past that figure already. So we are very confident that at the end of the year, we are going to generate, using the technology that we have deployed, generate the 10.4 trillion government has asked us to collect. So the first step we are taking was to develop our in-house technology, which we call tax formats, which taxpayers are now using for purpose of filing returns. We are also using for tax assessment, collection, and accounting purposes. Then at the Joint Tax Board level, in order for us to block leakages in the tax system as a country, in our national tax system, we are coming up with data for tax initiative, which is a blockchain technology, which we are going to use which will be used by the revenue generating agencies at the center and the 36 internal revenue authorities in the country. Another thing that I want to talk about is that we have the technology, but the technology only give you access to transactions in some cases because the tax laws in Nigeria are not such that are harmonized in such a manner that as FIRs, when we get to record of company A, we are able to use the technology that we have deployed to audit and maybe assess and collect taxes from the potentials that we have in the taxpayers' record, simply because we have multiple tax systems with multiple tax agencies in a manner that if you come across record that belongs to an individual, even if it's in billions of naira, the law has not permitted you to collect tax from that individual until we have a conversation around harmonizing our tax system. We are going to continue to have issues because the greatest leakage we have identified as revenue authority today is that of non-harmonization of our tax system. If you observe, it is clear that when tax administration and collection is harmonized, it is invariably has the effect of increasing collection seriously. South Africa personal income tax collection, for instance, in 2021, is a motive for Nigeria collect. This is an anomaly because Nigeria GDP in 2021 remains $440 billion, whereas that was South Africa just had 419, with a population of 211 million in Nigeria and their own population of just 60. Yet, personal income tax collection by then last year was in the region of 13 billion naira, 13 trillion naira, whereas what we collect as revenue authorities of the 36 states in Nigeria came to 1.2. So invariably, if not for the money that is being generated by the federal agencies, which has to be shared in line with the provisions of the law, the states would have not been able to fund their budgetary requirement. So these are conversations that we should be having in such a manner that we are able to block leakages, not only deploy technology, but block to the using amendment to tax laws by harmonizing our tax system so that we are able to generate more revenue to fund our budgetary requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Executive Chairman of the FIRS. We also have Dr. Ayo Tariba online. Dr. Ayo, please. Technical.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to commend the Honorable Minister and her team, the DG Budget Office and the DG Debt Management Office and the rest of us. These are turbulent times and we should not pretend not to understand the intensity of the pressure from pandemic to war in Ukraine and the rest of it. And you still manage to come every year to give us this peaceful sounding narrative about the budget process. My question, which is basically a suggestion, is we talk about revenue a lot, we talk about debt a lot. These are only two items in our financial strategy. When are we going to start talking about equity? And when are we going to start talking about assets? If we have a deficit of more than 10 trillion, nothing wrong with any size of deficit. The key issue is about how you choose to finance the deficit. So 10.7 trillion deficit, and we would like to issue 10.5 trillion debt against it. Could we perhaps increase the share of equity in financing the deficit? You don't pay interest on the equity. You don't repay equity to ease our burden. So my very simple question, is how soon are we going to start a parallel conversation on the role that equity can play? Many of our peers, other countries, have traveled a little far on this road. They issue more equity than debt. Nigeria's attractiveness as a destination for equity, both for domestic equity issuance, as the head of the stock exchange is here. Our stock exchange is perhaps larger than our debt market, but stocks are mostly private. Some of them could be public. And on the foreign scene, instead of Eurobonds, why not foreign direct investment? So we've spent a couple of hours here, we have not mentioned FDI. And this is our plan going forward. How soon are we going to be including equity, FDI, and assets, in our financing mix, so that we play up Nigeria's strength? The more equity you attract, the stronger you look. The more asset, you're able to leverage on, the stronger you look. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Honorable Minister, before I go to the next question, a paper just came here and it reads, unlike other employees of the federal government, like ASU, the civil servants are loyal and will continue to be loyal to the federal government of Nigeria. Question is, any reward for our loyalty in terms of better remunerations in the 2023 budget, please? From the round of applause, it would seem everybody had this on their mind. Honorable Minister, I think I would allow you respond to these questions before we go to the next batch of questions from the other wing.
Well, thank you very much. Let me start from the question from the loyal civil servants. And we've been hearing this, but as you know, the issue of adjustment of salaries is a process. You don't just provide it in a budget. There's a negotiation process that usually ensues before it is done. And we are beginning to increasingly hear this need to revisit the issue of the adjustments of the salaries of the public servants. Let me also remind us that, is it 3 years ago now, that we did the minimum wage adjustments. The minimum wage adjustment, when we started the negotiation, was just supposed to be for the public servants that were earning 18,000 naira. And we were supposed to move their salaries to 30,000 naira. But what happened was we ended up with what the service calls consequential adjustments. So the permanent secretaries here also had their salaries adjusted. So all through the service, including parastatals, all had consequential adjustments as a result of that minimum wage adjustment. The point is it requires a lot of resources to do that. It requires negotiation and being able to carefully calculate how much it will cost and how it will be funded. Our wage bill has grown from 15 to date by almost 250%. And it is getting to a point when the president had directed the review of the service itself. So we need to get that review completed and implemented. People call it the Orosanyan report, but there are so many reviews going on. So we have to look at the size of the service and what is the optimal combination of agencies that we need to put together to enhance efficiencies, but also to reduce cost. The question from Dr. Ayo Teriba, and I'm really glad you asked this question, because Dr. Ayo has been talking about how everyone knows how much we owe, but we don't know what we own. You know, Dr. Tayo, that we put together a committee for which you were a member. We have started a process of re-engineering the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which is an arm of government that has the responsibility of managing government investments. MOFI has been existing since, too many years ago with the same laws, and has gradually become quite inefficient, to be honest. So we have got Mr. President's approval to reinvigorate MOFI. We've done a lot of studies and reviews. We're now at the stage where we hope in the next month or 6 weeks we will be able to relaunch MOFI. We've been able to take stock of the assets that are currently in the books of MOFI. And even without taking the ones that are not currently in the books of MOFI, we already have about 30 trillion in terms of asset size. So you're looking at a debt of 10 billion, we have assets of 30 trillion. We're going to open these assets for investment. So we'll be issuing different kind of equity invitations for investment in these assets. Government doesn't have the capacity to recapitalize some of these assets enough. So when I talk about assets, I'm talking about investments like the Bank of Industry, the Bank of, the Development Bank of Nigeria, Galaxy Bank, several agencies of government, companies that government has set up, that government owns. Some of them, a few of them, are doing well and delivering dividends. But even our assessment is what they are doing can still be better by incremental adjustments. So I'll give you an example. For example, we have the railways in the books of MOFI at something like 20 million naira as the asset size, and we are conducting revaluations. By the time we finish the revaluations, the value of the Nigerian Railway Corporation will run into trillions. By the time we finish the revaluation, the value of the airports that we currently own will run into trillions. So there's a process that is well advanced, that is ongoing. We'll have MOFI truly set up as a world-class investment company with a new management and a new board, removed from the civil service structure. Currently, they sit as a unit under the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. We get core professionals that are really focused and specialized in portfolio management, in driving investments, to run MOFI. So we expect to sweat our assets to the maximum possible, to amend our books, to read, to show the true value. So when we go to borrow, even when we go to borrow, the lender always looks at what assets do you have and what are your potentials to generate revenue to pay. But we hope to actually raise equity, to open up these investment vehicles for Nigerians as well as non-Nigerians to invest in the assets that the federal government of Nigeria owns. So, Sitaya Teriba, thank you very much for bringing that up and giving us the opportunity to speak about the reintegration of MOFI. I think that's it for now. The chairman FRS has done well in terms of addressing the issue of the automation that they are currently working on, and the partnership between the states and the federal government, and also the need to harmonize our tax system so that it is truly a national system, because it's a major concern. A lady asked earlier on, what are we doing about property taxes? We're not able to do at the federal level much about property taxes because it sits in the purview of the states. we're not able to do a personal income tax at the federal level because it sits in the purview of the states. So the joint tax board is very instrumental to this harmonization process. If we get to a point where we have the same platform, an electronic platform, then we'll all collectively be able to do better.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We'll now go to this week. Okay, Leah's hand is up again.
Leah Katung Babatunde NT on the floods. This is an unfortunate phenomenon, and it's a global phenomenon that is upon us. These floods are a direct result of climate change. When we speak of climate change, people say, where is it? But it is here. The floods are happening even in areas that were probably previously desert prone. We've seen floods in Jigawa and in Borno State. But the one in Lokoja is overflowing of the river Niger. People are displaced. Farms have been destroyed, so crop yield this year will be poor. This afternoon, we have a meeting of the Presidential Council on Food Security. We are going to be looking at measures that need to be taken, first of all, to provide immediate succor to the people that are affected. And yes, we need data for that, but we are also the National Emergency Management Agency, the Ministry of Humanitarian Resources, is also working with the state governments to provide a data of the number of people affected so that we know what to plan for. We have some special funds that are designed for government to be able to intervene, the Ecological Fund, the Natural Resource Development Fund, and any other pocket of funds that we may need to access because this is a national emergency that requires for us to provide support to the people that are most affected. And there was a question earlier on the use of data, whether we are using data to assess the impact of the fiscal measures that we have taken, whether we are using data to affect the impact or to project the impact of any fiscal changes that we're making. I want to invite Dr. Yemi Dikpelu, the Senior Advisor to the President on Economic Affairs, who is also the chair of the Fiscal Committee that is preparing the finance bills to respond to this one. Dr. Dikpelu, are you still in the meeting? He's online. Or any senior member of the Fiscal Policy Committee. Secretariat, is Dr. Yemi Dikpelu in the meeting?
No, they said no, please.
Okay, but yes, we use data to make these assessments. There's a current assessment that is going on the impact of pioneer status, for example, and other incentives that have been provided for some specific sectors. We're assessing what is the benefit that the economy has been able to gain from this. And our assessment is that some of these incentives have really reached the point, the maturity point where we should begin to pull back from them. And also as we're trying to introduce new incentives to especially support new industries, young immigrant industries that have the potential to also grow the Nigerian economy. In my report, I had reported earlier on the fintech industry, for example, is one sector that we're looking at. Industries that are largely driven by youths and by women are also being considered for new incentives. And then there will be some industries that have matured that will be retired from the current incentives that they enjoy. We also report this revenue expenditure, which is in the medium-term expenditure framework. The size has grown. In 2022, we reported actual expenditure of 5 trillion in 2021. This is a collection of all of these incentives, waivers, exemptions that have been provided. We've also projected that in 2022, it could go up to 6 trillion. So this is revenue that we're actually foregoing, and we're reviewing it with the focus to rebalance from some industries to another, but also to reduce down the costs because we also need the revenues.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. So we go to this wing, please. There should be a balance. So we go to the other wing. Okay, sir, we start with you on the 1, 2, 3, on the fourth row, sir. Yes, sir, you.
No.
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Celestino Kudiliodo from the ActionAid Nigeria. So thank you, the Honorable Minister, for the good work being done. Yeah, my question starts first on the issue of tax expenditure when we talk about revenue. You know, I know there have been a lot of advocacy with regards to reducing the level of tax expenditure in Nigeria. And if you look at that, there's so much being lost. I'm happy that you're already speaking about that. We just want to know, how do we have tax expenditure report for Nigeria? And if the answer is yes, how much do we spend annually? Yeah, on the issue of taxation. So secondly is looking at the aspect of a fuel subsidy. Yeah, between January and June, according to the report, we've spent like 1.56 trillion already on fuel subsidy and projected 3.6 for the 2023. The question is, how do we verify this figure? And who is benefiting? Is it possible to sit down with the Nigerian Labour Congress, discuss on pulling out, stopping this expenditure, and putting it into productive sectors, you know, that will really have multiple effects on the economy? Because Nigerians believe that there's so much fraud on this fuel subsidy. And I think it's time that we really need to reevaluate, look deeply into it. You know, there are lots we can do with that money. If put into education sector, agriculture, health, they will have multiple effects on the economy. So it would be good if this should be looked into. Secondly is the 1.5 billion USD that was mapped late last year for the revamping of the refineries. So maybe if you can give us updates, I think there's February 2023 timeline that they will start production. Maybe if you can a little highlight on that. The other one is on the aspect of debt. Yeah, I think Nigerians are really worrying on the increasing debt profile. You know, when you said we are still at 23% with a threshold of 40% of the GDP, I think the worry is how much is our revenue and how much do we use to service debt? Second quarter report, I think retail revenue was about 1.6 trillion. We use 1.9 trillion, if I'm correct, to service debt. I think that is not progress. We really need to look at that. But is borrowing the only source of, you know, domestic resource mobilization? I think there is need to expand our horizon and not just depending so much on borrowing, because it seems there's so much effort on the aspect of borrowing. The IMF, the World Bank, and all that, of course, they will open up horizon more than 55% for us to continue borrowing. But the question is, you know, that borrowing, is there any public debate on what that fund is being put into? Yeah? The present government, we know there have been a lot in terms of that, but you know, the public also, that the money is borrowed on our behalf, should also have a say in what that money is being put into. You know, I know the Fiscal Act 2007 used to provide or had a threshold, but I don't think we obey that. And the usefulness,
Sir, you could
the
wrap it up,
investment.
please.
Okay, thank you very much. Lastly, I will just say that public expenditure has been increasing over time. 2023 budget, 20-point-something trillion. But poverty, inequality, all the economic indices variable are negative. What is government really doing in terms of bringing the economy back to state?
Thank you, sir. I'll take the madam seated between the two road safety officers, please. That's you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, ma'am.
So I am an old 74-year-old woman, Fulani woman from northeast of Nigeria. I was born and brought up under rural area. That's how now, since I am a billionaire in education, I registered my NGO to assist my poor background. You cannot imagine the challenges I went through. At the end, I went to the World Bank. World Bank said yes, but they want the federal government, I don't know which of the office that will give them permission to assist on the access road and bridge. You cannot imagine me, the drama I went through education, walking on foot, no shoes, fetching water. We created 36 states as government up till now. And I have a lot of villages surrounding mine. They are all farmers. How will they communicate going through on a bridge? No. During the rainy season, when the river is full, I used to buy boats for them to cross. So that's why now I was in this office where she gave me, introduced me to the director of budget, and I didn't hear from them up till now. So I want, please, since the
Most respectful, ma'am, please could you introduce your name and the village you're talking about so that the Honorable Minister can take note. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, I am Hajia Amina Gambo. We served Nigeria also 3 positions. My late husband, Alhaji Gambo, as Inspector General of Police, National Security Advisor, and Minister of Agri. He died on the 21st of January 2021.
Where is your village, ma?
My village is under Adamawa, under Song local government. The name of the village is Urode.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next
not
question. Okay. The next question, please. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself. Go straight to the question.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Emperor Simon. I report for Channels Television. I'd like to find out the status of the taxation policy for beverages. What has been raked in so far in that regard? And then we understand that this administration has a plan, a national development plan.
No, sir, you know, I gave somebody else the floor, but you took the floor. So finish so that we go back to the person who has the floor.
My apology, please. So this administration intends to launch a national development plan for 2050. Where are we with regards to that plan? Is it going to come, is it going to be launched? And I'm also concerned about the debt profile of this country. So I'd like to ask the Honorable Minister, how does she feel, even though she has consistently said that it's within the threshold, but Nigerians are worried over the fact that the debt profile keeps increasing. Is this administration worried about that? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman beside the camera in the suit. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Vivian Ikema, and I represent the non-alcoholic subsector of the Food and Beverage Manufacturers Association. Honorable Minister, you enumerated various challenges at the macroeconomic level that are constraining growth nationally and globally. So, COVID, the war in Ukraine, climate change and insecurity and all of that. So what this clearly shows is that all these will constrain growth across all levels, including industry. So whether I relate that to your strategic growth, revenue growth initiative and the overriding focus on increasing revenue, what it means essentially to me is that we are looking at increasing taxes on industry. And we're wondering, do you sincerely think the industry can survive additional taxes? And I speak from my own industry perspective. You recall that this year, excise duty was introduced in this sector at 10 naira per litre. And from our studies so far, between June and August, because the excise duty took effect in June, between June and August, the revenue available to the industry has declined by -8%, and is projected to decline by -16% between September and December this year. So we're really wondering whether the government has really taken time to do an assessment of the impact of the current tax regime and the ability of industry to accommodate additional taxation without having to go down. So we'd like to know what your thoughts are around this.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there any female hand on that wing before I move on to... Any female hand there that I might have missed? No. So the man in suit and white shirt whose hand was on, sir, he's beside you. You have the floor, sir. Yes, sir. Well, you might have forgotten your question because you seem to be asking someone else. I think all your questions might have been answered. So the Honorable Minister, I come back to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much for this question. Let me start from Hajia Amina Gambo and ask that you should please see us so that we can understand what are these issues that you expected our interventions on. And to be honest, I remember a meeting, but I can't recall what the issue is. So if you can, we'll arrange for you to, some of my aides are here. There are two ladies in front of you. If you can just link up with some of them, then we can meet. And to go back to the issue of public debt, the truth is the Nigerian economy will have been in a very bad shape if we had not borrowed to make sure that the economy is stable, that we exited the two recessions that we went into caused by global occurrences. We wouldn't have been able to emerge from recession, and to allow a country the size of Nigeria, with the number of people that we have, to stay in recession for a long time is to face the risk of going into a depression. So government decided to adopt an expansionary stand. At a time when revenues plummeted, we decided to borrow, to invest in infrastructure, and to invest in human capital development. The fact is we will have been worse off if we didn't do that. It is true also that a lot of African countries are classified to be in debt distress or near debt distress. But let us not make light the impact of the multiple global recessions that African countries have been facing in the past few years. From COVID to the war in Ukraine to climate issues, I mean, Nigeria has been lucky. The impact of COVID itself was not so much on the health side. What affected us is the impact on trade, which meant that trade lines were broken. And then in the specific case of Nigeria, the crash in the crude oil price. But we've seen countries whose economy have been built over 50 years, and with one day of a natural occurrence, the whole country's investment is wiped out. And so it means they are set back by development 50 years. A lot of the Caribbean countries fall in this. And so we should be thankful to God for minimizing the impact of climate change, but also be thankful that the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari has been able to contain these adverse occurrences and stabilize the economy, and still, within very limited resources, be able to invest in infrastructure and in human capital development. These investments that we're making now, it will be years down the line that people will appreciate the need for these investments. Because it's either you borrow now and build out roads, bridges, railways, and airports, or you wait to be able to build them with your revenue, and therefore you continue to regress. So our assessment is that is the best thing to do, and we did what we could in the interest of our country. On the issue of tax expenditure, the MTEF has, is on the website of the Budget Office, has details of the tax expenditure. Earlier on, I said we reported tax expenditure of 5 trillion in 2021, and then 6 trillion in 2022. So it's very, very significant. And therefore, despite the fact that industry, as well as our colleagues in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, keep wanting to add more of these incentives to attract businesses to keep business, we still have to find a balance between the revenue that we're foregoing and the investments that we're trying to attract. On fuel subsidy, I hope civil society participants that are here will also work with us to engage labor. We have been engaging labor on the matter of fuel subsidy. As you know, it's a very sensitive situation. And let me remind us that during the COVID in 2020, we actually exited subsidy. But somehow we pushed back from labor when fuel prices began to rise and the modulation mechanism that we put in place kept being adjusted. When we went to 165, labor pushed back and we're beginning to ask for salary increases, which we could not afford. So President directed for us to stand still. So we're 165 when the landing cost today, even at NAFEX exchange rate, is 331 naira. It's not sustainable. It's something that we have to address as a people. And it is easy for government to just say, let's exit it. But it has to be implemented, and it has to be implemented in such a way that we don't have a disruption in the polity. On refining, NNPC, even in the retreat that we had yesterday, still reiterated the commitment for the Port Harcourt and the Warri refineries to come on screen in Q1 and Q3 2023 to the extent of 50% of the two refineries. So we are watching that and hope that it actually works out. And then to also say that NNPC under the PIA is to go to a public offer, which means NNPC will go out to invite equity investment in the corporation. I don't know exactly the timeline for doing that, but it's in between the short to the medium term. In second quarter 2023, so there will be shares of NNPC that will be open for public investment. So let's all start saving towards that. And then also we have some federal highways that are now going through a concession process, 14 of them under the Federal Ministry of Works. So they made assessments on the roads that are most commercially viable, and they are open for competition. So there will be the toll infrastructure will be built by private sector participants, and they will collect toll to recover their investments, while a proportion of the revenue will be coming to government for government to be able to maintain the roads as built. But also the airport terminals are at an advanced stage of concession. The Nigerian Air is also at an advanced stage of concession. Those are all things that are investment focused and investment driven that are meant to drive revenue improvement. So it's not just about increasing taxes, that as someone has said. We introduced the carbonated tax. There was a question as to how much has been raked in. I don't have the numbers. I don't know whether the customs will be able to provide. Otherwise, when we get it, we can put it on the website just to provide the information. But it's reported as part of we have reports that the revenue is beginning to pick up, and there is compliance by the industry in terms of payment of the excise duties for carbonated drinks. But we're looking at the possibility of introducing in the next Finance Act ring-fencing those taxes, excises from the carbonated drinks to specific health purposes, so that it will be clear what those taxes, so the sin taxes for alcohol, cigarette, and the carbonated drinks, we're considering how to ring-fence them for specific health sector expenditure. We hope it survives the process at the end of the day. I think I've addressed all the issues. So, Mr. Simon, on the Nigeria Agenda 2050, our plan is to have His Excellency the President launch this agenda either in November or December, subject to the schedule of Mr. President. The work is advanced. We are now at the stage where the Agenda 2050 document is being circulated to MDAs to get their inputs, and also the document will be taken to the National Economic Council to get inputs, and to the Federal Executive Council to get inputs and approval. Then it will be launched. So it's virtually ready. Final question for me to address is another one from Leah. Census, are we on course? Yes, we are. From the side of the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, we have provided most of the funding that is required for the census. I'm sure you've all seen the trial census successfully completed. The National Population Commission tells us that the census is scheduled for April, and I have not heard anything yet to the contrary, but perhaps they will announce the specific dates themselves. Okay, thank you. Again, on the non-alcoholic beverages, I don't want to provide a number because what is here is an estimate. I would like to have this provided specifically as part of our budget implementation report, so that what we're providing are numbers that are reconciled. I think I've covered everything. Did I miss out on anyone's question? Well,
Honorable Minister, ma'am,
thank
you so very much. Thank you, ma'am. Well, before the Honorable Minister brings forth her closing remark, remember it was India Narendra Modi that said, while transparency reduces corruption, good governance goes beyond transparency in achieving openness. Openness means involving stakeholders in decision-making process, and transparency is the right to information, while openness is the right to participation. I think this is what the Honorable Minister has done here today, and so it's time for her to give us her closing remark. Please join me welcome the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Shamsuna Ahmed, CON.
To invite the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mr. Aliu Ahmed, to give us a roundup and the closing remark, and followed by the Permanent Secretary, Budget and Planning, to give us a vote of thanks.
Well, this is really to thank you. I believe that the presentations, the question and answer sessions, the responses from the Minister and the DG Budget, and of course Chairman Inland Revenue Service has provided you with robust responses to all the issues you have raised. And hopefully you have been sufficiently educated for all the questions which we could not provide immediate responses to in terms of the numbers. The Minister has made the point that those responses will be put on our website, and you are also free to approach the DG Budget and any member of the team here for additional clarification. So we really want to thank you for coming, and we hope that as the days go ahead, you can give feedback. As you have seen, there are two portals that have been indicated, the app and then the web portal, where you could
monitor what is going on comprehensively in the days and the weeks ahead. Of course, bilateral discussions will hold with the National Assembly before the budget is fully finalized. So without saying much, let me give the opportunity to the PAMSEC Budget and National Planning, who would have the floor, to properly thank you for coming to this event, for sparing the time to attend this event. Thank you very much. DG Budget, PAMSEC Budget.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning participating virtually, also the Honorable Minister of Youth and Sports Development, Chief Sunday Dare, the Honorable Minister of Education, here represented by Mr. Andrew Adejo, the Permanent Secretary, the head of the Civil Service of the Federation, represented by the PAMSEC CSO here present, the PAMSEC Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development that was here, Abubakar Ismail, PAMSEC Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs, Engineer Funsho Adebi, PAMSEC Federal Ministry of Information and Culture, Mrs. Lydia Jafia, and other PAMSECs, both here and those attending virtually, the hardworking DG Budget, the head of Debt Management Office, head of PITAD, Chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Service, and heads of other government agencies that are here with us, both fiscally and virtually, the directors and other top government officials, our partners from the World Bank, development partners and diplomatic community, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I will start by thanking you for your patience. This hall was filled from beginning right to the end, even though we extended the time allocated for this presentation for the Honorable Minister to be able to take all the questions that arise. You know, like they say, money matters are not easy matters. So on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, I thank God for making this public presentation of the Federal Government of Nigeria 2023 budget proposal a huge success that it is. I'm grateful to the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Dr. Mrs. Zainab Samsudeen Ahmed, Commander of the Order of the Niger of the Federal Republic, for the excellent delivery of the public presentation and ensuring that restoration of the January to December budgeting process is in place. It is a testament to the commitment of the federal government to ensure a predictable process. Let me also sincerely appreciate the Honorable Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Prince Clem Agba, who has worked closely with the Honorable Minister to achieve what we have here today. The PAMSEC Finance also appreciated for his relentless work leading to this presentation. My thanks go to my colleague permanent secretaries for their sense of responsibility, patriotic zeal, and to take time out of their busy schedules to be part of this national event. Of course, I thank the DG Budget of the Federation, who not only ensured timely presentation of the budget, but did justice to the nitty-gritty issues and also questions raised in this occasion. Permit me also to extend sincere appreciation to all the DGs and heads of government agencies here present, the Statistician General of the Federation, the Director General, NISA, the Director, Center for Monument Development, the Chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Service, Director General, Debt Management Office, the Accountant General, the Acting Accountant General of the Federation here with us. Your commitment to this process, all of us, demonstrate determination of various government agencies to work together for a common good. I thank you for your support and collaboration. Also noteworthy of mention are representatives of the private sector, civil society organizations, and our friends, the development partners. We appreciate you all. I will not end without acknowledging distinguished Senator Solomon Adede, who has joined, Solomon Adiola, sorry, who joined us online for his support throughout the budget process and also the finance bill. Let me also appreciate in a special way institutions, corporate organizations, and individuals that contributed one way or the other in the delivery of the budget. In particular, I appreciate members of the National Assembly for being a worthy ally in ensuring the anticipated timely passage of the 2023 budget into law. As you are all aware, Mr. President laid the budget estimates before a joint session of the National Assembly some days ago. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I will not end this vote of thanks without appreciating our friends in the media for always being supportive. I salute your objective reportage and cooperation. I hope that you will, as usual, give this event the desired reportage. You know, the indices and assumptions underpinning the 2023 budget estimates have been well explained to Nigerians with the succinct presentation of the Honorable Minister. Finally, I will not fail to thank all our most valued participants for attending this budget presentation. And also, I thank you again for your patience. I trust that we are going back more informed and therefore more determined in our resolve to jointly make this work. Thank you also the Master of Ceremony for a very good work.
Thank you, sir.
And the cameraman, and of course our technical team. Even though we had a few technical glitches online, I think those were connection issues. So I thank you all and wish you all journey messages to our listeners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neboli-san. I call there with the vote of thanks. At this point in time, permit me remind all of us to engage it on www.finance.gov.ng and www.budgetoffice.gov.ng. My name is Glory Ohago. Have been supervised by Mr. Afolabi Olajuwon, Fellow, Nigeria Institute of Public Relations. Shall we all rise for the national anthem in closing? Thank you for your time. Go play your part, and may Nigeria prosper. Do have a good day. Please, could you all wait as we allow members on the table of responsibility depart before we follow? I know all of us are in a hurry, but please, let's just allow that. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.